Welcome back to the Deep Dive. So today we're focusing on something it's pretty much everywhere. It sits in your pocket, on your desk, and probably in your car's dashboard.
Oh, definitely in your car.
Right. But you likely never actually see it. We've been calling it the invisible engine, but honestly, even that metaphor feels a bit light.
It really is. I mean, if you just took the semiconductor industry out of the equation, you wouldn't just lose your phone.
No.
You'd lose, the power grid, modern banking, medical imaging. The entire world would just stop.
And what's so fascinating to me, for something so absolutely critical, is the scale of it. The scale is almost, well, it's impossible to really comprehend.
It is.
I'm going to start exactly there.
Yeah.
With the scale, because we have these numbers from the source material, and I feel like we usually just read them and kind of move on, but let's pause.
Okay.
In 2021 alone, semiconductor sales hit a record $555.9 billion.
$500 billion.
$500 billion. Flowing through this one very specific sector in 12 months.
And, that's just the revenue. The number that really gets me, the one that keeps me up at night, is the volume.
Okay.
In that same year, the industry shipped 1.15 trillion units.
1.15 trillion.
Trillion, with a T.
Let's break that down for a second.
Yeah, so there are, roughly 8 billion people on the planet?
About that, yeah.
If you do the math on that, it means the industry produced something like 140 semiconductor devices for every single man, woman, and child on Earth.
In 1 year.
In 1 year.
That's just, it's absurd. I mean, I have a phone, a laptop.
Yeah.
But I definitely don't have 140 new devices.
Yeah.
So where are they all going?
Well, they're everywhere. They're in the obvious places for sure, but they're also in your washing machine, your credit card.
The greeting card that plays a song when you open it.
Exactly. The thermostat on your wall. We've basically reached a point where we are manufacturing these incredibly complex microscopic structures as if they were, grains of rice.
And that's really the mission for this deep dive, isn't it? We need to figure out how we got here. How did we go from a lab experiment to this global machine that just churns out 1 trillion units a year? And the journey it's not a straight line.
Not at all.
It involves a $25,000 license fee that literally changed the world. And it ends with factories that cost almost $20 billion apiece.
Which creates this really strange paradox. The end product, the chip itself, is cheap and ubiquitous. You can buy one for pennies.
Right.
But the machine that makes it is the most expensive, most complex, and most concentrated industrial system humanity has ever built.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Okay.
And I think we have to start at the beginning. The source material calls this the spark. We're going back to 1948.
Right. Bell Labs. This is the post-war era, a time of massive scientific optimism. And you've got 3 scientists, John Bardeen, Walter Brattain, and William Shockley.
And what are they working on?
They're trying to solve a really basic problem, how to amplify electrical signals and how to switch them on and off. At the time, we were using vacuum tubes for this.
Vacuum tubes. So these are the glowing glass bulbs you see in old radios and things like that.
Exactly. And they were, to be blunt, they were terrible. Objectively speaking.
How so?
Well, they were bulky, they got incredibly hot, they burned out constantly, and they used a massive amount of power. You couldn't build a smartphone with a vacuum tube, so it would be the size of a skyscraper.
And need a nuclear power plant to run.
Pretty much, yeah.
So these 3 guys at Bell Labs, they invent the transistor.
They invent a solid-state device that can do everything a vacuum tube can do, but it's made from a tiny piece of germanium and later silicon.
So no moving parts, no filament to burn out.
Right. It doesn't need to warm up. It's small. It's reliable. It is, and this is no exaggeration, the fundamental building block of the digital age.
Now, here is the part of the story that I found genuinely shocking when we were doing the research.
Mm-hmm.
Bell Labs is part of AT&T. A massive corporation. They've just invented the golden ticket. Right. You would assume they'd lock this down, patent to the hilt, and sue anyone who even looked at it funny.
That's the standard corporate playbook, for sure. But they didn't do that. They did something that seems almost insane by modern standards. They decided to license the technology.
And not for $1 billion.
No. For $25,000.
$25,000? I mean, even if you adjust for inflation, that is peanuts.
It's the price of a mid-range sedan today.
For the keys to the entire future of electronics. Why? Why on earth did they do that?
There are a few theories, but the end result is what really matters. By setting that price so low, they removed the barrier to entry. If they'd charged $1 million, maybe only a company like GE or RCA gets in the game. But at 25 grand,
Everyone could play.
everyone could afford a ticket to the dance.
And looking at the timeline in the source, it seems like everyone really did jump in.
Immediately. It kicked off what I like to call the Silicon Rush. By 1952, Motorola bought a license. By 55, Shockley leaves Bell Labs to start his own company. You have Texas Instruments, Fairchild Semiconductor, Sylvania. I mean, the floodgates just opened.
It's just such a great example of how open innovation, or at least accessible innovation, can accelerate an entire field.
Absolutely. If Bell Labs had kept that secret, we might still have been using vacuum tubes well into the 60s, maybe even longer.
But there was still a big problem, right? The transistor was great, but you still had to wire them all together by hand.
Right. That was the tyranny of numbers, as it was called. If you wanted to build a computer, you had to physically solder thousands of these tiny little components together on a board.
Which sounds slow and expensive.
And unreliable. If just one of those solder joints failed, the whole thing died. It was a massive bottleneck.
Which leads us to the next huge leap forward, 1958.
The year of the integrated circuit, the IC.
And this is another one of those weird historical coincidences where two people basically solve the same puzzle at the same time.
Yeah, Jack Kilby at Texas Instruments and Robert Noyce over at Fairchild Semiconductor, they both independently figure out that you don't need to solder discrete parts together.
What's the alternative?
You can manufacture the entire circuit, all the transistors, the resistors, the capacitors, all of it, on a single monolithic slice of semiconductor material.
A chip.
A chip. This is the birth of the modern semiconductor. And this invention is what really unlocked Moore's Law.
Moore's Law. Okay, we hear this term thrown around all the time. Computers get faster every 2 years. But what does it actually mean, in the context of this industry?
So Gordon Moore, who was one of the co-founders of Intel, he just made an observation. He noticed that because of this new manufacturing technique, the number of transistors we could cram onto a single chip was doubling roughly every 2 years.
And crucially, because you're fitting more on that same piece of silicon.
The cost per transistor plummets.
So it's a prophecy of exponential growth. And the source material gives us these data points on process nodes that, frankly, are a little hard to visualize. So I want to walk through them.
Let's do it.
Okay, we start in 1968. The process node is 20 micrometers.
Okay, so a micrometer is a millionth of a meter. 20 micrometers. That's about the size of a very fine dust particle, or a wool fiber. It's small, but in the world of microscopy, it's a boulder.
Then we jump forward just 6 years to 1974. We're at 6 micrometers.
So we shrunk it by more than half. This is the era of, the early arcade games, the very first home computers.
Then 1987, we break the micrometer barrier. We are now at 800 nanometers.
A nanometer is a billionth of a meter. We are now operating at a scale that is smaller than most bacteria. This is the late 80s boom, the 386 and 486 processors.
And the free fall really begins. 2014, we hit 14 nanometers. 2020, 5 nanometers. And just in 2022, 3 nanometers.
3 nanometers. To put that in perspective for you, your fingernail grows about 1 nanometer every single second.
Wow.
We are building structures that are only a few times larger than a single strand of DNA.
It breaks my brain a little bit.
Yeah.
We are manufacturing things at a near atomic scale. And we're not just making 1 or 2 in a pristine lab somewhere.
Yeah. No, we're making trillions of them.
Trillion.
And that really is the miracle. It's not just that we can do it, it's that we can do it reliably, billions of times over for a few dollars.
I like the analogy you used before we started, the car analogy.
Oh, right. Imagine if the automotive industry worked like this. Imagine if a Rolls-Royce got twice as fast, twice as safe, and half as expensive every 2 years for 50 years.
What would that look like today?
By now, a Rolls-Royce would cost a nickel, go the speed of light, and fit in your pocket.
That's a great way to put it, but it also highlights the incredible pressure. I mean, if you're a car company and you don't release a new model this year, you're fine. But in this industry, if you miss that 2-year cycle,
you're dead, or you're at least severely wounded. The entire industry is built on this innovate or die treadmill. And that relentless pressure has completely reshaped how the business actually works.
Which brings us perfectly to our next section, how the industry actually works. Because the way these companies are organized today is very, very different from how they were organized back in the days of Jack Kilby and Robert Noyce.
Drastically different. In the beginning, let's say pre-1980s, the industry ran on what we call vertical integration.
The do-it-all-yourself model.
Exactly. We call these companies IDMs, integrated device manufacturers. And if you were an IDM in 1970, You did everything. You designed the chip's architecture,
Right.
you owned the land, you built the factory, you purified the silicon, you even built the furnaces and the lithography tools yourself because nobody else was selling them yet.
You bake the bread from scratch,
Yeah.
starting with growing the wheat.
That's a perfect analogy.
It just sounds incredibly inefficient by modern standards. You have
Yeah.
to be an expert in logic design and chemistry and structural engineering and supply chain management all at once.
It was inefficient, but it was necessary because that specialized supply chain just didn't exist yet. But as the technology got more and more complex, it became basically impossible for one company to be the best at everything.
So the industry fractures. It specializes. And this is really crucial for you, the listener, to understand, because when you look at the stock market today, you see names like NVIDIA and TSMC, and they do completely different things.
Right. We moved to a specialized model, and you essentially have three types of players now. First, you still have the IDMs, the survivors.
So who are the big ones left that still do everything?
The two big ones are Samsung in South Korea and Intel in the United States. They still cling to that old model. We design it and we build it.
Okay, so that's group one. Then you have group two, the fabless companies.
Fabless, meaning they have no fabrication plant, no factory. These are companies like Qualcomm, NVIDIA, AMD, Broadcom.
Even Apple with their M-series chip.
Even Apple fits here.
So what do they actually do if they're not building anything?
They deal in pure intellectual property. They hire thousands of brilliant engineers to essentially draw the blueprints. They figure out exactly how the electrons should flow to make your video game look realistic or your AI model run faster. But they don't own a single furnace.
I can see the business appeal there. You don't have to spend billions on concrete and highly specialized equipment. You just need computers and smart people.
Exactly.
But if NVIDIA just draws the picture, who actually builds the chip?
And that is group three, the foundries. These are the pure play manufacturers.
The workhorses.
The printing presses. Their entire business model is, you send us the design, we will build it for you. They don't design their own chips to compete with you, they just manufacture.
And the undisputed king of this model is TSMC.
Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company. They are the absolute titan of this space, along with UMC, also in Taiwan, and Global Foundries, which has more of a U.S. and global footprint.
This separation seems like genius in a way. It allows a company like NVIDIA to start up in a garage, metaphorically, and become a trillion-dollar giant without ever pouring a foundation for a factory.
It massively lowered the barrier to entry for design, but, and this is the crucial catch, it massively raised the barrier to entry for manufacturing.
Right. And this leads us directly to the high cost of poker. Because I'm looking at the costs of these factories, these fabs, and the numbers are just staggering.
They're astronomical. Let's look at the data point in the source for TSMC's latest expansion. To build a factory capable of producing those 3-nanometer chips we talked about, a factory they completed in 2020, the price tag was $19.5 billion.
$19.5 billion for one building.
One facility. To give you some context, you could build a dozen Burj Khalifas for that price.
You could build a Nimitz-class aircraft carrier and still have billions of dollars left over.
Exactly.
So why? Why does it cost that much? What is in that building?
A lot of it is the equipment and the environment. You need clean rooms that are thousands of times cleaner than a hospital operating theater.
Because a single speck of dust on a 3-nanometer wafer.
It destroys the chip. It's a killer.
Wow.
And then the machines themselves, the extreme ultraviolet lithography machines, the EUV machines you need for this work, they cost about $150 million each. And you need rows and rows of them.
So logically, this just creates a massive moat. I can't just wake up tomorrow and say, hey, I think I'll start a foundry to compete with TSMC.
Impossible. You need nation-state levels of capital. And because that cost is so high, the number of companies who can actually afford to play this game has just shrunk and shrunk.
The consolidation.
Exactly. If you look at the cutting edge, the absolute smallest, most advanced nodes, there are only 3 companies left in the entire world that can do it.
Who are they?
TSMC, Samsung, and Intel.
That's the list.
That's the whole list. Everyone else is tapped out.
And even on that short list, there's a lot of drama. Intel, which for decades was the undisputed king, seems to be stumbling.
Stumbling might be putting it politely. The source material highlights a major potential shift here. Intel is seriously considering outsourcing some of its production to TSMC.
Wait, pause on that for a second. Intel is an IDM. Their whole identity, their marketing slogan for years was, real men have fabs.
Yeah.
If they outsource to TSMC, isn't that just admitting defeat?
It's a huge strategic concession. The data shows that Intel got stuck. They got stuck at the 10-nanometer node. They had yield issues. They couldn't get the manufacturing recipe right. And meanwhile, TSMC and Samsung just sailed right past them to 7 nanometers and then 5.
So Intel, the American giant, fell a full generation behind the technology curve.
And in this industry, being a generation behind is catastrophic for your economics. So to keep their products competitive, they might have to use their biggest competitors' factories.
That's a tectonic shift in the power dynamic of the industry.
Yeah.
It really shows how unbelievably difficult this manufacturing process actually is.
It's not just about throwing money at it, it's about deep institutional knowledge. And look at Global Foundries. They're a major player, a big company.
Right.
But they looked at the R&D cost of developing 7-nanometer technology, the cost of all that new EUV equipment, and they just said, nope.
They just quit the race for the cutting edge.
They stopped development entirely. They made a strategic decision to settle on 12 nanometer as their best node. They realized they could make plenty of money making slightly older, but still critical, chips for cars and appliances. And they let the big three fight it out over the bleeding edge.
It's a rational business decision, but it means we are putting all of our most advanced eggs in very, very few baskets. Which brings us to the geography of all this. Section 4. Market dynamics. Because if there are only a few key players, where they are located suddenly matters a whole lot.
Oh, geography is destiny in the chip world. And if you look at the history, it's really been a game of musical chairs.
The source has this great ranking data. Let's go back to 1985. Who was on top of the world then?
Japan. In 1985, the #1 semiconductor company in the world was NEC, followed by Texas Instruments, then Motorola. But then at number 4 and 5, you have Hitachi and Toshiba.
So 3 of the top 5 were Japanese companies. Where was Intel?
Intel was number 8.
Wow. So back in the 80s, everyone must have been writing books and articles about how Japan was going to dominate the digital future forever.
They absolutely were. But look what happened. The industry shifted. By 1995, Intel shoots up to number 1. NEC and the others start to drop.
And by 2011...
By 2011, the landscape looks totally different again. Intel is still number 1, but Samsung has risen all the way to number 2, and TSMC, the foundry, enters the top charts at number 3.
And the Japanese giants have largely fallen off that top tier.
For the most part, yeah.
And what about the most recent data from 2021?
2021 shows the dominance of this new order. Samsung actually took the number 1 spot for revenue, Intel dropped to number 2, and SK Hynix, another Korean firm specializing in memory, is number 3.
So the center of gravity has really shifted from Japan to the US, South Korea, and Taiwan.
Precisely. You have these specialized hubs. The U.S. leads in design, the fabless companies, and has a strong IDM with Intel. Taiwan completely dominates manufacturing with the foundries, and South Korea dominates memory.
And then you have China, which is the big rising challenger.
China is spending a massive amount of money to catch up. In 2021, sales in China reached almost $200 billion. They have a huge internal market. But they're still fighting against that massive barrier to entry on the manufacturing side with companies like SMIC.
Now, I want to clarify something for you. We keep saying semiconductors and chips as a kind of catch-all term, but are we just talking about computer processors here? Because the outline mentions a product breakdown that suggests it's a lot more diverse than that.
Yeah, this is a really common misconception. We all tend to obsess over the CPU, the central processing unit, because, it's the brain of the computer.
Right.
But if you look at the revenue pie from 2017, microprocessors were only about 16% of the total market.
Only 16%. So what's the biggest chunk?
Memory.
Memory, like RAM and hard drives.
Exactly. Memory chips accounted for 30% of the market. That's $124 billion. Every single device needs short-term memory, which is DRAM, and long-term storage, NAND flash. It's a commodity, but it's a massive, massive one.
Okay, so memory is number 1, and the source says logic is number 2.
Right, logic is about 25%. And these are your special purpose processors, chips that run your graphics card or handle networking or other specific tasks.
And then there's this category called discretes. This sounds like the junk drawer of the industry.
It's not junk. It's the glue that holds everything together. Discrete devices are single-function components.
So like one transistor by itself.
One transistor, one diode, one rectifier. These aren't supercomputers. They're simple little switches or valves for electricity.
But the volume must be.
The volume is staggering. In 2018, the industry shipped 62.8 billion discrete transistors. In 2014, they shipped 154 billion diodes.
154 billion diodes.
Think of them as the nails and screws of the electronic world. You don't marvel at a nail, but you can't build a house without thousands and thousands of them.
So when we hear about chip shortages stopping a car factory, it's not always the high-end $1,000 brain chip that's missing.
A lot of the time it isn't. Sometimes it's the 10-cent diode that stops the entire production line. It's a highly interconnected ecosystem. If you run out of the cheap stuff, the expensive stuff is just a paperweight.
I also want to touch on the volatility that the source mentions, because we have this picture of an industry that just goes up and up and up. But the notes say it has dramatic cyclical swings.
It's an absolute roller coaster. The long-term average growth is strong, about 13% over 20 years. But year to year, it can be brutal.
Why, though? I mean, everyone always needs more chips. Why would sales crash?
It's the inventory cycle. Because products become obsolete so fast, remember that innovate or die, treadmill companies are terrified of having too much inventory of an old chip. But then when demand spikes, like it did during COVID, they all panic and double order from the foundries.
Creating a huge boom.
A massive boom, which is followed by an inevitable bust when everyone realizes they have warehouses full of chips they don't need.
So it's a boom and bust business with a $20 billion entry fee. That sounds stressful.
It requires, as the source puts it, high degrees of flexibility. You have to be able to turn that $20 billion factory on and off, figuratively speaking, to match the wild swings of the market.
Okay, so let's try to bring all this together. We have an industry that started with a almost benevolent licensing deal in 1948.
Right, the $25,000 spark.
That spark ignited a revolution. It shrank technology from the size of a dust mote to the size of a DNA strand, following Moore's law.
For 50 years.
It consolidated from a free-for-all into a high-stakes poker game played by only 3 giants. And now, it underpins $555 billion in direct annual sales.
And that's just the direct sales. The source also mentions that global technology industry sales were expected to hit $5 trillion in 2019. That entire $5 trillion rests completely on this semiconductor foundation.
It really is the invisible engine. But as we look to the future, I have to ask the provocative question, can this go on forever?
That is the big question, isn't it? We are starting to approach the physical limits of silicon. You get to 3 nanometers, then 2 nanometers. Eventually, you run into the size of the atom itself.
You can't make a transistor smaller than an atom.
You can't. And then there are the economics. If the next generation factory costs $20 billion today, will the one after that cost $50 billion, $100 billion?
Exactly. We might reach a point where Moore's law stops, not because of the laws of physics, but because of the laws of economics. It simply becomes too expensive to take the next step.
And if only one company on Earth can afford to build that next factory, do you even have a market anymore? Or do you have a global monopoly on progress?
That's a really sobering thought. We have built the entire modern world on the fundamental assumption that chips will get cheaper and faster forever, if that engine stops.
The whole machine seizes up.
Well, on that cheerful note, I think we have given everyone plenty to chew on.
I would think so.
Next time you pick up your phone, or start your car, or even use your toaster, just take a second to visualize the billions of those nanometer scale switches inside, all firing away. It really is a modern marvel.
It's the most complex machine humanity has ever built, hiding in plain sight.
Thanks for diving in with us.
Thank you.
We'll see you in the next one. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are tackling a concept that it feels incredibly modern.
Oh, yeah.
It's something you hear all the time in marketing meetings, or you see it splashed across magazine covers.
Or hashtagged everywhere.
Exactly. But it actually has these really deep roots that go way, way back to 18th century German philosophy. We are talking about the Zeitgeist.
It is a heavy word, literally. And I don't just mean how you say it.
It is heavy. It feels weighty, you know? And honestly, before we look at this massive stack of research, I mostly thought of it as just a fancy way of saying what's trending.
Right, like a fad.
Yeah. Like bell-bottoms were the Zeitgeist of the 70s, or Avocado toast was the zeitgeist of 2016.
And that is certainly how it's used today, colloquially. It's basically become a synonym for a fad. But the mission for this deep dive is to go much, much deeper.
Okay.
We want to explore this idea that the zeitgeist isn't just a list of trends or, a look back at fashion. We're looking at it as a potential invisible agent.
An agent.
Yes. A force that actually dictates how we think, how we act, maybe even who we vote for, all without us really realizing it.
See, that's where it gets a little spooky for me.
Yeah.
The idea that there is this force just pulling the strings. It sounds a bit like a conspiracy theory, but it's actually mainstream philosophy. So, okay, let's start with the basics. The word itself.
Right. It's German, a compound word.
Zeit and Geist.
Zeit meaning time and Geist meaning spirit or, ghost. So quite literally the spirit of the age.
Zeitgeist. I feel like I need to be wearing a turtleneck and holding a coffee to say it properly.
It does have that vibe for sure.
But the definition we have here describes it as the intellectual, cultural, ethical, and political climate of an era.
It's the atmosphere. It's like the water we're swimming in. And our source material highlights something fascinating right away. It's often described as an invisible agent or even a demon.
A demon.
Yeah, a demon that seems to dominate the characteristics of a period.
See, that's the part that really stood out. It makes it sound like we aren't actually making our own choices.
Right.
That this spirit of the age is the puppet master. Like we're just NPCs in a video game that was coded by the era we happen to live in.
And that is the central tension, really. It's the ultimate question we're going to explore today. Is history made by so-called great men? Individuals who grab the wheel and steer. Or are those leaders just products of their time?
People who were just summoned by the zeitgeist because the world was ready for them.
Exactly.
It's the ultimate nature versus nurture debate, but like on a huge historical scale.
Precisely. We have a lot to get through. We're going to look at the etymology, which is surprisingly dramatic.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And then the sociology, which gets into how this spirit works on a subconscious level. And then we'll end up in Silicon Valley
I love that.
to see how venture capitalists are literally betting millions of dollars on their ability to read this ghost.
From German philosophers to tech bros and fleece vests. I love it. Okay, let's jump in. Section 1, the origins of the ghost. Now, I always assumed this was a Hegel term.
Right. George W.F. Hegel. He's the big name that's always attached to it.
Yeah.
If you take a philosophy 101 class, they'll tell you Zeitgeist, that's Hegel. But here is where we get our first sort of aha moment.
Go on.
The term actually predates him.
Really?
Yes. It was popularized by two other figures, Johann Gottfried Herder and Johann Wolfgang von Goethe.
Good, like the Faust guy.
The very same. But to understand why they came up with this, you have to picture the scene. It's 1769. Herder is writing this critique called Kritische Wälder.
1769, so we are pre-French Revolution, pre-American Revolution.
Exactly. The world is just on the brink of massive change. The tectonic plates of history are shifting. And Herder is wrestling with, of all things, a translation problem.
The translation problem created this huge idea.
It really did. He's looking at this Latin phrase.
Which was?
Genius seculi. It translates to spirit of the century or guardian spirit of the age.
Okay, genius seculi, that sounds fine. A little dry maybe, but why not just use that?
Because Latin was the language of the old guard. It was the language of the church, of the stuffy academics, the static past. Herder and Goethe were part of the Sturm und Drang movement, storm and stress. They wanted emotion, passion. They wanted something that felt raw and alive.
They wanted to capture the texture of reality, not just catalog it in some dead language.
Right. Genius seculi sounds like a statue in a museum. But Zeitgeist, you have to understand, Geist in German is this really tricky, powerful word. It isn't just spirit, like a ghost in a sheet.
So what else does it cover?
It covers mind, intellect, wit, morale, essence. It implies intelligence and, crucially, intent. So when Herder coined Zeitgeist, he wasn't just translating a word. He was making this radical claim that time itself has a mind.
Whoa.
That an era isn't just a calendar date. It's a living, breathing entity with its own personality.
That is. Yeah, that's much heavier than just what's trending on TikTok.
Much heavier. And it didn't stop there. Once they opened that door, these spirits started multiplying. You mentioned the family of spirits earlier.
Yeah, the notes mentioned Volksgeist and Weltgeist.
Right. Let's break those down because they explain a lot about how we still see the world. Volksgeist is the national spirit.
Which, I have to say, sounds a little dangerous politically.
It certainly can be, and it has been misused, absolutely. But originally for Herder, it was an attempt to explain distinct cultural flavors. Why does French poetry feel so different than German engineering? Why does Italian opera hit you differently than English theater?
Okay.
Herder argued it's the Volksgeist, the collective personality of a people.
So you have the spirit of the nation, the Volksgeist, and then you have the Weltgeist.
The world spirit. That's the big one. This is the idea that there is a unified spirit of all humanity, and it's moving towards some kind of goal.
They were really obsessed with categorizing these invisible forces. It's like they were trying to draw a map of the wind.
That's a beautiful way to put it. They were trying to explain why people in different eras or different places seem to think and act so differently. The idea was that our thoughts and our actions aren't just shaped by, timeless truths or our own individual genius.
They're shaped by the social environment of the time.
Exactly. It's the climate. That analogy is perfect. You can't grow palm trees in the Arctic. The climate dictates what can flourish.
Right.
And this brings us back to that demon concept. Because in the 18th and 19th centuries, this wasn't just a passive backdrop. It was seen as a dominating force, an invisible agent.
So it suggests that if you're living in a certain time, the zeitgeist is actively pushing on you. It's prescribing what is acceptable, what is tasteful.
What is considered true for that specific window of time.
Which feels a lot like peer pressure.
Yeah.
But on a massive societal level. It's not just your friends telling you what to wear. It's the entire universe telling you what to think.
In a way, yes. And that segues perfectly into how sociologists look at this today. We move from the philosophical demon, which feels a bit magical, a bit spooky, to the sociological construct.
So let's get into that. Section 2. Sociology and the vibe of an era. How do modern sociologists define this? Because I'm guessing they aren't talking about literal ghosts haunting the library.
No, not quite. In sociology and cultural history, the zeitgeist is defined as a diffuse system. It's a system of ideas, of images, of values that underpins how we behave.
And the key part here, from what I read, is that it's only partly conscious to us.
That is the critical distinction. We're doing things, buying things, believing things, and we think we're doing it because we just, decided to. We think, I chose this career because I like it, or I chose this outfit because it expresses me.
But the sociological view is that we're actually doing it because the zeitgeist has made those things the default option.
It reminds me of that iconic scene in The Devil Wears Prada. You know the one I mean?
Oh, the blue sweater?
The cerulean sweater, yes.
Right. Anne Hathaway thinks she just picked some random blue sweater out of a bin. But Meryl Streep just dismantles her.
She does. She breaks down how that color was in a collection by Oscar de la Renta, then it was in the magazines, then the department stores, and then finally the discount bin she found it in.
She thinks she made a choice, but the industry, the zeitgeist of fashion, made it for her years ago.
That is exactly the mechanism. It filters down and down until it just feels like common sense. The source material we have compares this to the Overton window.
Oh, I've heard of that. That's usually used in politics, isn't it? Like the range of policies a politician can talk about without sounding totally extreme.
Correct. Imagine a window frame. Inside the frame are ideas that are acceptable. Outside the frame are ideas that are radical or unthinkable or just insane. But the trick is the window moves.
Can you give us a concrete example, just to pin it down?
Sure. Think about smoking indoors. In, say, 1950, if you walked into an office and someone wasn't smoking, that might seem weird. The zeitgeist, the Overton window of behavior, said smoking at your desk was normal, professional, even relaxing.
And today, if you lit a cigarette in an office, you'd be escorted out by security.
Exactly. The window moved, the spirit of the age shifted on health, on public space. But if you apply that concept broadly, the zeitgeist is the Overton window for everything. Fashion, architecture, journalism, it dictates the pattern of fads that are considered tasteful.
So if you try to build a brutalist concrete building in an era where the zeitgeist is all about glass and light and eco-friendliness, you aren't just different.
You're wrong.
You're offending the spirit.
You are fighting the current. Now, we have to bring Max Weber in here. He's a giant of sociology. He viewed the zeitgeist as an ideal type.
An ideal type? That sounds positive, like the ideal man.
It's not a judgment of quality. It's more of an analytical tool. Weber knew that reality is messy, it's complex. There isn't actually one single spirit that everyone agrees on.
Of course not.
But to study history, we have to create a simplified model. We accentuate certain traits to make sense of the chaos.
So we say the 60s were about rebellion and peace, even though tons of people in the 60s were conservative and totally supported the war.
Exactly. We create a kind of caricature to help us understand the general vibe, but that leads to the major critique of the whole concept. The expert warning, you could say.
Yeah, what's the danger here? Because it seems like a useful shortcut.
The danger is that focusing on a single, unified spirit of the age it can obscure the real social conflicts. It overlooks minority positions, dissident voices. It suggests a uniformity that never actually existed.
It erases the people who didn't fit the vibe.
It does. Defining a zeitgeist is always an act of interpretation. It's subjective. For one group, the spirit of the age might feel like liberation and progress. For another group, living in the exact same year, it might feel like oppression and decay.
So it's not a ghost that haunts everyone equally. It's more like a dominant narrative that we apply after the fact.
Precisely. But even with that critique, the concept is incredibly useful for understanding leadership. And this brings us to the main event, the title fight.
Section 3, the great debate, heroes versus the times. I love this. This is the philosophical cage match.
In one corner, we have the great man theory, and in the other, the Zeitgeist theory.
And representing the great man theory, we have Thomas Carlyle.
Thomas Carlyle, a Scottish philosopher with a very intense, almost religious view of history. His view is simple and, frankly, very appealing to our egos. He believed that history is just the result of the actions of heroes and geniuses.
Leaders are special. They're built different.
Yes. He stresses that leaders do not become leaders by accident. They possess specific innate characteristics, traits that grant them power. They shape the world. The world does not shape them.
It's the Steve Jobs view of history. One guy has a vision, he wears a black turtleneck, and he literally bends the universe to his will.
Precisely. Carlyle called these people lightning out of the cloud. He thought the rest of us, the rest of humanity, were just dry wood, waiting for the hero to come along and ignite us.
Lightning out of the cloud.
Yeah.
That's a powerful image.
But
I have to stop you there. I feel like we dismiss this idea too easily these days. I know the great man theory is out of fashion in academia.
it is.
We're supposed to look at systems and socioeconomics. But come on, you really think if Steve Jobs hadn't been born, we'd all be walking around with iPhones right now? Was the iPhone just inevitable?
That is the billion-dollar question, and it's exactly where the other side steps in to dismantle your argument.
Wow.
Representing the zeitgeist, we have Leo Tolstoy and, interestingly, our old friend Hegel.
Ah, Hegel's back.
Carlyle is largely reacting against the Hegelian view. Because Hegel didn't see these great men as independent operators at all. He saw them as vessels.
There's this quote in the notes about Napoleon that is just, it's amazing. Hegel saw Napoleon not just as a brilliant general, but as, how did it go?
The world's soul on horseback. Die Weltseele du Fer.
That is such a metal image. The world's soul on horseback.
It's poetic, for sure, but think about what it actually means. It's incredibly diminishing to Napoleon's individual ego. Hegel is basically saying that Napoleon was merely the embodiment of the world spirit. The forces of history, the zeitgeist, had built up so much pressure that it needed to be released. Napoleon was just the valve.
So if it wasn't him, it would have been someone else.
Someone else would have done it.
So you're saying if Steve Jobs wasn't born, some other guy, Steve Wobbs, would have invented the smartphone in 2007.
Hegel and Tolstoy would say yes,
Okay.
absolutely. Maybe not the specific design of the iPhone with the single button, but the general shift to mobile computing. The technology was there, the internet bandwidth was there, the consumer desire was building. The zeitgeist demanded it.
That is a very hard pill for the ego to swallow.
Tolstoy goes even further in War and Peace. He looks at Napoleon on the battlefield, and he doesn't see a god of war orchestrating some grand symphony. He sees a guy sitting on a horse, shouting orders that nobody can even hear because of the smoke and noise.
Right.
While the battle just chaotically unfolds based on a million tiny interactions between scared soldiers in the mud.
So Napoleon thinks he's steering the ship, but he's actually just riding the rapids.
Exactly. Tolstoy argued that kings and generals are actually the least free people in history.
How does that work? They're the ones giving all the orders.
Because they are the most constrained by the expectations of the moment. They are the focal point of the zeitgeist. If Napoleon had decided not to invade Russia, the pressure of the French Empire would have found another release valve. Maybe a different general, maybe a different war. The event was inevitable. The man was interchangeable.
Okay, so we have two extremes. The hero who invents the future and the puppet who just acts it out.
And this brings us to the psychological parallels, the trait approach versus the situationist approach.
Right. The trait approach lines up with the great man theory. It says, let's look at the personality traits of leaders. Are they charismatic, bold, narcissistic? It assumes the magic is inside the person.
And the situationist approach argues that our behavior is a product of our society. Social influence determines what we do. A leader is just someone who happened to be in the right place when the social environment demanded a certain type of action.
It's the difference between saying he changed the world and the world was ready to change and he was just standing at the front of the line.
Exactly.
So who wins? Is it the hero or the ghost? Because I feel like both sides have a really strong point.
Well, as is so often the case in these deep dives, the answer isn't A or B, it's C. It's the synthesis,
The solution.
the interactional approach. And we actually have a formula for this from a social psychologist named Kurt Lewin.
I did not know there would be math today, but okay, lay it on me.
It's a beautifully simple equation, but it basically solves the whole debate. B equals FPE.
B equals FPE.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, decode that for me.
Behavior B is a function of the person, P, and the environment, E.
That actually makes perfect sense. It's so simple.
It's elegant, isn't it? You cannot separate the individual from their context. You need the specific traits of the person, the great man potential. But those traits only activate or succeed if the environment, the zeitgeist, is receptive to them.
So a Napoleon born in a peaceful, stable era might just end up being a really annoying, bossy middle manager.
Precisely. He has the drive, he has the ego, but the environment, E, gives him no outlet for conquest, so he just micromanages the quarterly reports.
And a Napoleon born in a chaotic revolutionary era without his strategic genius would just be another forgotten casualty. You need the match.
You need the lock and the key. This connects to Emile Durkheim, to modern social capital theory. We are embedded in this web of social forces. We bring our personality to that web, but the web limits and directs what we can do.
This feels like the perfect bridge to our final section. Because if there is one place on Earth that is obsessed with finding that perfect match between the person and the environment,
It's the world of startups.
Section 4, Zeitgeist in Silicon Valley.
It's fascinating that this high-minded German philosophy has made its way into VC pitch decks.
Right, you'd think they'd be quoting balance sheets, not Hegel.
But if you think about it, VCs are in the business of prediction. They are betting on the future. They use the concept of zeitgeist to understand why entire industries emerge when they do. They're looking for that simultaneous invention.
Which is when different people invent the same thing at the same time, totally independently.
Right. Think about the telephone. Bell and Gray filed patents on the exact same day. Think about calculus, Newton, and Leibniz.
Which suggests the spirit of the times was just ripe for it. It wasn't one lone genius. The knowledge was sort of floating in the air.
Malcolm Gladwell talks about this a lot in his book Outliers.
Oh, Outliers is a classic on this topic.
Gladwell argues that success so often comes from early personal or significant exposure to knowledge in a brand new industry.
It's all about timing.
It is. He proposes that the timing of your involvement when you were born, when you entered the workforce, it just drastically impacts your probability of success. It's not just about being smart. It's about being smart at the exact moment the wave is cresting.
If Bill Gates had been born 5 years later, he completely misses the personal computer revolution. If he's born 5 years earlier, he's probably too old to care.
Exactly. And the notes mention some huge Silicon Valley names here. Peter Thiel, Vinod Khosla, Max Levchin. They all seem to subscribe to this environmental view.
They do. They argue that innovation is shaped by the environment, specifically things like access to the internet, open source software, and global markets.
If you tried to build Facebook in 1990, you fail. Period. Not because the idea is bad, but because the infrastructure, the environment, it just wasn't there. The E in Lewin's equation was missing.
But there's a flip side. Peter Thiel has that very famous critique about our current zeitgeist. He said, there is so much incrementalism now.
Incrementalism. So just making tiny tweaks instead of big leaps.
Yeah. He basically says we were promised flying cars, and instead we got 140 characters.
His argument is that the current environment, the current E, is actually stifling true radical innovation. The spirit of the age has become risk-averse, or maybe just too focused on entertainment instead of real progress.
That's an interesting thought. So the zeitgeist can be a headwind just as easily as it can be a tailwind.
Absolutely. And investors are always looking for what they call a zeitgeist market.
What are the characteristics of a zeitgeist market?
Well, it's a market defined by the times. First, you see a huge number of new companies rushing in.
Like the AI boom right now. Every startup is an AI startup.
Or the dot-com boom. Perfect examples. Second, differentiation becomes really difficult. When everyone is chasing the same spirit, everyone's products start to look the same.
So let's get practical. I'm a VC. I'm looking at a Zeitgeist market, let's say generative AI. The market is flooded. How do I actually pick a winner in all that noise?
You have to look for what the source calls differentiation through agency.
Agency. Define that for me in this context.
Okay, in a Zeitgeist market, the core technology, the AI model, for instance, it becomes a commodity very, very quickly.
Right. Everyone has access to the same basic engine.
So if everyone is selling the same engine, the winner isn't the one with a little more horsepower. It's the one who makes the car easiest and most useful to drive.
So user experience, basically.
It's deeper than just a nice interface. Agency means the product acts on your behalf. Think about the dot-com boom. There were 1,000 places to buy pet food online.
Rest in peace, pets.com. The sock puppet was a legend.
A legend. But who won that war? Amazon. Not because they had better dog food, but because they bundled the whole experience. They handled the trust, the shipping, the returns, the credit card security. They took the agency of the transaction off your shoulders.
They solved the headache, not just the problem of an empty dog bowl.
They solved the headache. So if we apply that to AI, the winner probably won't be the model that writes the absolute best poem. It'll be the one that automatically integrates into my email, drafts the reply, checks my calendar, and hits send without me having to learn complex prompt engineering.
Bingo.
That is surfing the zeitgeist. You aren't fighting the wave of technology. You are building the surfboard that makes the wave navigable for the average person.
And that connects right back to what Peter Thiel was saying about incrementalism, doesn't it?
It does. Thiel's critique is that we've stopped looking for totally new waves. We're just polishing the surfboards we already have. But the true visionaries, the ones who perfectly combine the person and the environment, are the ones who see the wave long before it breaks.
This has been a wild ride.
Yeah.
We started with Herder translating Latin in 1769. We went to Napoleon on a horse, broke down the math of human behavior.
And ended up with VCs in Palo Alto trying to predict the next unicorn.
It really shows the power of a single concept. So let's wrap this up. What's the big takeaway?
For me, it's that the spirit of the age isn't a ghost. It's not magic. It is the context that makes individual action possible in the first place.
They're the P in Lewin's equation.
We are the P. We have our own traits, our own will, our own ideas. But we can't ignore the E, the environment. We are, as the sociologists say, structurally coupled with our times.
It's humbling, really. It takes the ego down a notch. You aren't just a genius in a vacuum. You are a genius because the world was ready for your specific kind of genius.
And that raises the final and maybe the most important question.
What's that?
If the sociologists are right and the zeitgeist is only partly conscious to us, if it really is the invisible water we're swimming in, what is the spirit we are living through right now that we are completely blind to?
Oh, that is going to keep me up tonight. What are we all doing today that people in 50 years will look back on and say, oh, that was so typically 2020s and we don't even realize we're doing it?
That is the question. Is it our reliance on algorithms? Is it our hyper-individualism? Or maybe something we consider a great virtue today will be seen as our greatest flaw.
To everyone listening, we want you to look for the invisible forces shaping your own week. Are you making choices, or is the demon making them for you? Thanks for diving deep with us.
I'll see you next time.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are tackling the beast. And I don't mean a dragon, though. There are plenty of those where we're going.
Oh, yeah.
We are unpacking the sheer, massive cultural monolith that is Game of Thrones.
It really is the definition of a monolith. It's actually, hard to remember now. But there was a time before this show, a time when prestige TV meant, guys in suits in an office.
Right. Or maybe a mob boss in New Jersey.
Exactly. It definitely didn't mean ice, zombies, and dragons.
That's so true.
Yeah.
It felt like the whole world was watching it together, which is something that it barely happens anymore. But we aren't here to just recap the Red Wedding or, argue about which Stark had the worst luck.
Though it's all of them. Spoiler.
It's all of them, yeah. We were looking at the machinery behind the curtain. We're digging into how a series that was technically deemed unfilmable by its own author.
By its own author, yeah.
How it managed to become the most awarded drama in Emmy history.
And maybe more importantly, we're going to look at the cost of that success. And I don't just mean the budget, though the financial numbers we found are, I mean, they're honestly kind of nauseating.
Oh, yeah.
But the creative cost, that transition from faithfully adapting this dense political novel to becoming a global blockbuster franchise, and all the controversy that came with that shift.
So for this deep dive, we're basing it on a massive stack of source material, mostly the production history and a lot of the critical analysis that came out over the years.
Mm-hmm.
The mission today is to explore that whole journey, from that impossible pitch meeting all the way to that incredibly divisive finale.
It's a roadmap that takes us through, like, disaster pilots that almost killed the show before it even started.
Right.
To global logistics that sound more like a military operation than a TV shoot.
Mm-hmm.
And a cultural footprint that literally changed the economies of entire countries.
So let's start at the beginning, or I guess the pre-beginning. Because the story of Game of Thrones on TV actually starts with a hard no.
It kind of does, yeah. It really starts with the author, George R.R. Martin. And to get why Game of Thrones even exists, you have to look at his resume. He wasn't just some novelist, tucked away in a cabin.
He was a Hollywood guy.
He was a creature of Hollywood.
I saw in the notes he worked on The Twilight Zone, and was it Beauty and the Beast in their late 80s?
He did, yeah. He was a screenwriter, a producer, and that whole experience is the key to everything. Martin said, basically, that his whole life in Hollywood was defined by one word: cut. His first drafts were always too big, too expensive, too complex. He was constantly being told, George, this is great, but we can't afford a battle scene, so can you make it a duel between two guys?
Oh, that's soul-crushing.
Yeah, or we can't afford a castle, so just make it a room.
You had this massive imagination, and the budget department just hands you a pair of scissors and tells you to trim the edges.
It drove him crazy. So when he left TV to go back to writing novels, specifically A Song of Ice and Fire, it was like a reaction. He said, and this is a quote, "I'm sick of this. I'm going to write something that's as big as I want it to be."
So he wanted thousands of characters.
He wanted a cast of thousands, castles that were miles high, huge battles, dragons. He was basically writing the books to be unfilmable.
He was building a firewall against Hollywood. He just made it so expensive that no studio could possibly touch it.
Exactly. He thought it was unfilmable himself. He'd compare the size of just one of his novels to the Lord of the Rings trilogy, but even denser. So when producers started sniffing around, which they did, they mostly wanted to turn it into a movie.
Okay, but hold on. Why not a movie? I mean, Lord of the Rings made billions. If I'm a producer, I'm looking at those books and I'm seeing a trilogy of blockbusters right there. Why was that such a bad idea?
It's a totally valid question, and the studios definitely wanted that. But David Benioff, one of the showrunners, he did the math. A movie has, a 2.5-hour runtime?
Right.
You'd have to cut dozens of characters, whole storylines. But the real deal breaker was the rating.
The rating.
Yeah, think about the economics of a blockbuster. To make your money back on a, say, $150 million fantasy movie, you need a PG-13 rating, you need teenagers in the seats. And Benioff looked at Martin's books, which are just full of incest and beheadings and some very creative profanity, and he realized, if we make this PG-13, it's not Game of Thrones anymore.
It's just generic fantasy.
It's just generic fantasy.
Right. You take out the grit, you take out the sex, the horror, and you're just left with people in capes waving swords around. It loses its soul completely.
Precisely. And Martin agreed. He said he never imagined it anywhere else but HBO, because back then HBO was really the only place where you could do that adult content with a serious budget.
So, enter David Benioff and D.B. Weiss.
Yeah.
They read the books. The source says Weiss read the first novel in, 36 hours?
Which, if you've ever seen the size of that paperback, is a serious physical feat.
Seriously. So they get this meeting with George R.R. Martin. It's at a restaurant on Santa Monica Boulevard. And this isn't like a quick coffee and a handshake kind of meeting.
No. It lasted 5 hours. Just imagine that. A 5-hour lunch.
Wow.
And Martin, being a veteran screenwriter, he wasn't going to just hand over his unfilmable baby to a couple of guys who'd never run a TV show before. He needed to know they got it on a deep level.
And there was a test. A pop quiz.
The famous question? Martin just looked them in the eye and asked, "Who is Jon Snow's mother?"
Now, for anyone who's watched the show or read the books, this might seem kind of obvious now, but back then, this was the holy grail of the fandom. It wasn't written down anywhere.
No, it was the central mystery of the entire lore. It meant connecting these tiny little dots scattered across thousands of pages. And Benioff and Weiss, They apparently answered correctly.
And that was it.
That was the moment they won him over. They proved they weren't just looking for some generic fantasy IP to exploit. They had actually engaged with the texts, like, forensic detectives.
Yeah. So they pass the test. They get the rights. HBO acquires them in 2007. They start developing it. Everything seems great. They shoot the pilot in 2009. And history is made.
Well, history was nearly ended. The pilot was a disaster.
Define disaster, like it wasn't quite right, or like burn the tapes and never speak of this again.
We are talking burn the tapes level. They shot the pilot Winter is Coming in 2009. They showed it in a private viewing to some friends, some colleagues, including screenwriters like Craig Mazin.
Okay.
And the reception wasn't just lukewarm. It was confused. People didn't understand that Jamie and Cersei were brother and sister.
Wait, that's the main hook of the first episode? If you don't get that they're related, the ending where he pushes Bran out of the window makes absolutely no sense.
Exactly. The storytelling was muddy. The wigs were apparently terrible. The chemistry wasn't landing. It didn't work.
So what did HBO do?
This is where we have to just pause and look at the money. That pilot reportedly cost HBO between $5 and $10 million.
$10 million for a single hour of television that nobody liked.
In the corporate world, that is usually what they call a fireable offense level of failure.
Oh, yeah.
Most networks would just cut their losses, shelve the project, and fired everyone involved.
Right. If I blow $10 million at my job, I don't get to say, oops, let me have another go. I get a cardboard box and an escort out of the building.
Exactly. And that's the key insight here about HBO at that time. They weren't just buying a show, they were buying a strategy. They looked at the wreckage of that pilot and they decided the idea was still worth saving.
So they demanded a reshoot.
A massive reshoot. And I don't mean a few pickup shots. They reshot 90% of the episode.
90%. That's basically making the episode twice.
It is. They essentially gave Benioff and Weiss a mulligan on a multi-million-dollar scale.
Yeah.
And they made huge changes. Crucial roles were recast, for instance, Catelyn Stark. In the pilot, she was played by Jennifer Ellel. In the series, that role went to Michelle Fairley.
Wow. I can't imagine anyone else but Michelle Fairley as Catelyn now. She brought such a steeliness to it.
And maybe even more significantly, Daenerys Targaryen. Originally, she was played by an actress named Tamsin Merchant. She was replaced by Emilia Clarke.
Whoa. That is a massive what if for television history. Emilia Clarke is Daenerys in the public consciousness.
It just goes to show you that the Game of Thrones we all know wasn't inevitable. It was forged through a really rocky, expensive, and risky birth. HBO took a huge gamble that fantasy for adults was a viable market, even after seeing a failed proof of concept.
So they survive the pilot, they get the green light, now they have to actually build this world. And build is the right word because the production logistics described in the source material are just, they're mind-boggling. It sounds less like a TV show and more like a construction project.
The scale is what really stands out. And let's talk about the money first, because that dictates everything else.
Show me the dragons. Show me the money.
Right. So the first season's budget was estimated at $50 to $60 million.
Which is already a hefty price tag for TV season back in 2011. It's about $6 million an episode.
It was huge for the time.
Yeah.
But compared to what came later, it sounds like pocket change.
It really does.
Look at the trajectory. By season 6, the budget was over $10 million per episode. And by the final season, it was estimated at $15 million per episode.
$15 million for 1 hour. That puts them in the same tier as, like, blockbuster filmmaking.
It does. But even in the early days, when they didn't have that infinite money cheat code, they were pushing the limits. There's this one specific anecdote about the season 2 episode Blackwater.
Oh, the big battle episode, Stannis Baratheon attacking King's Landing.
Yes. In the books, this is this massive naval assault, with ships burning, chains across the river, thousands of soldiers. The showrunners looked at their budget and realized they couldn't come close to affording it.
Right.
They had to go to HBO, like, on their knees and beg for more money. They got a 15% budget increase, about an extra $2 million, just for that one episode.
So it cost $8 million total.
Just for Blackwater, yeah. And even then, they had to use tricks, right?
Yeah.
I remember reading that they set the battle at night specifically to hide the lack of background detail.
Darkness is cheaper than CGI.
Exactly. But money is just one resource. You need places to spend it. And this is where the global production aspect comes in. We hear filmed on location all the time, but Game of Thrones took that to a pathological level.
Where did they go?
It's more like, where didn't they go? Northern Ireland, Canada, Croatia, Iceland, Malta, Morocco, Spain. At one point, they had 3 separate full production units filming in parallel. They called them the Dragon, Wolf, and Raven units.
That is a logistic manager's nightmare. You have 3 full crews, thousands of miles apart, all needing costumes, catering, cameras, and actors who have to fly between them.
And these weren't easy locations. Northern Ireland was home base, the Painhall Studios in Belfast. But they used the landscape for everything. The Mourne Mountains stood in for Vase Dothrak. A quarry called Mourne was the backdrop for Castle Black.
It's amazing how they turned a damn quarry in Ireland into a frozen wall at the edge of the world.
But for the real North, they didn't fake it. They went to Iceland. They filmed on the Vatnajökull Glacier.
I can't even pronounce that.
It's a mouthful. They also filmed at the Svinafellsjökull Glacier. Now, just stop and think about what that actually means. These aren't sound stages with temperature control.
No.
They are dragging heavy IMAX-quality cameras, sound equipment, lighting rigs, and hundreds of people onto an actual moving glacier.
Freezing cold, slippery ice, limited daylight.
The actors have talked about this. When you see Jon Snow looking miserable and freezing his butt off in season 2, he isn't acting. He is miserable and freezing.
Method acting by necessity.
Exactly. And then you have the complete opposite, the sunny south, King's Landing. In season 1, they used Malta. But for season 2, they moved to Croatia, specifically Dubrovnik.
Ah, Dubrovnik. That's the image we all have in our heads now for King's Landing. That walled city on the water.
It's iconic. The walls of Dubrovnik and Fort Lovrženak, that move really defined the whole aesthetic of the capital. It gave it this verticality, this sense of ancient, sun-baked stone that you just can't build on a backlot.
And later they added Spain, right, for Dorne.
Yeah, the Alcázar of Seville stood in for the water gardens of Dorne.
It just creates this texture. I think that's why the show felt so different. You watch some fantasy shows now, and it feels like everyone is standing in a room with a green wall behind them. This felt gritty.
Gritty is the perfect word. And that texture, it extends to the costumes. The costume designer, Michelle Clapton, had a very specific philosophy. She didn't want it to look like a costume drama where everyone's wearing pristine clothes right off the rack.
The lived-in look, I've heard about this.
She insisted that all clothing be aged for 2 weeks.
Aged? Like what, they just leave it out in the rain?
Pretty much. They had a whole department dedicated to destroying clothes, greasing them, sanding them, dyeing them, putting them in dryers with rocks. Because on high-definition TV, if a peasant's tunic looks brand new, the illusion just breaks. If a knight has been riding for a month, his cloak should look like it smells bad.
That is dedication. It's those little subconscious details that sell the reality of it all.
And the materials were fascinating. The source mentions that Dothraki dress was based on Bedouin attire, but they used fish skins to make it look like dragon scales.
Fish skins? That must have smelled interesting on a hot day in Morocco.
I can only imagine. And for the wildlings, their armor was made from molds of actual bones, all assembled with string and latex to resemble catgut.
That is visceral.
Yeah.
But it fits the show perfectly. I mean, they're wearing what they kill.
See, that's the pattern here. Whether it's fish skin armor or dirty tunics or freezing on a glacier, they are obsessed with closing that gap between fantasy and history. They wanted you to be able to, like, smell the world.
But looking the part is only half the battle.
Yeah.
If these gritty, realistic characters open their mouths and just speak gibberish, the whole illusion shatters.
Right, because in old sci-fi movies, aliens just make random noises or they just speak English with a weird accent. And that brings us to the next huge hurdle, the languages. Specifically, Dothraki and Valyrian.
These weren't just gibberish the actors made up on the spot.
Far from it. This is another one of those examples of HBO spending money on things other networks would have just ignored. They hired a linguist, David J. Peterson. He constructed these entire languages based on just a handful of words found in Martin's novels.
How much did he actually write? Like, did you just do the lines for the script?
No, he built a language from the ground up. Before production even started, Peterson had written 300 pages of Dothraki material.
300 pages. That's a textbook.
It is a fully functioning language. Grammar, vocabulary, word functions, sentence structure. You could write poetry in it. You could order a coffee in it if the Dothraki drank coffee.
And it had a real-world impact, right?
Yeah.
The language learning app Duolingo started offering High Valyrian courses.
It did.
People are actually learning it, like, instead of Spanish or French.
Between 2017 and 2020, 1.2 million people signed up for the High Valyrian course.
That is wild. 1.2 million people learning a language for a country that doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
That just shows the level of immersion this show achieved. People didn't just want to watch it. They wanted to live in it.
Exactly. And that immersion served a very specific purpose. It wasn't just about being cool. It was about establishing what critics started calling medieval realism.
Let's unpack that term, medieval realism. Because, this is a show with ice, zombies, and dragons. How is any of it realistic?
That's the central tension of the show, isn't it?
Yeah.
George R. R. Martin wanted to downplay the magic, at least in the beginning, in favor of the battles and the political intrigue. He wanted it to feel like historical fiction.
Wars of the Roses, right. That was a huge inspiration.
Exactly. Lancaster and York becoming Lannister and Stark, but the realism comes from the psychology and the consequences. Martin has this great quote. The true horrors of human history derive not from orcs and dark lords, but from ourselves.
Humans are the real monsters.
And unlike traditional fantasy where, the hero has destiny and is definitely going to survive, Game of Thrones introduced this sense of genuine mortal danger.
The death toll. We have to talk about the death toll. It became a running joke that you shouldn't get attached to anyone.
The statistics are pretty sobering. A scientific study in 2018 found that about 60% of the major characters died from violence or war.
60%. That is basically a coin flip for your favorite character.
A little worse than a coin flip, actually. In a 2012 study of 40 TV drama shows, Game of Thrones ranks second in deaths per episode. They average 14 deaths per episode.
14 deaths per episode. That's a massacre every single week.
In the early seasons, this created this immense tension. Think about the execution of Ned Stark in season 1.
Still not over it.
Yeah.
That was the moment the show told us the rules had changed.
Yeah.
Sean Bean was on the poster. You don't kill the guy on the poster.
Exactly. It taught the audience that being good or honorable didn't save you. In fact, it usually got you killed. That's realism.
But this leads to an interesting point from the source material. In the later seasons, critics started to notice that characters developed plot armor.
Ah, the dreaded plot armor. The magical force field that protects main characters because the writers need them for the finale.
Yeah.
As the show deviated from the books and became a more traditional TV blockbuster, key characters just started to survive situations that would have absolutely killed them in season 1.
Right. Like falling into a freezing river in full armor and being fine, or getting stabbed in the gut and then running around the next day. The realism started to give way to the needs of the spectacle.
And alongside the violence, we have to address the other big controversy, which was the sex and nudity. The show was frequently criticized for its depiction of sexual violence.
And the term sex position.
Yes, a term that was pretty much coined because of this show. It refers to providing exposition, so explaining the plot, while nudity or sex is happening in the background.
The Peter Baelish scene in season 1.
That's the most famous example. He's explaining his entire evil scheme while 2 prostitutes are, in the background. It felt like they were worried the audience would get bored with politics, so they threw in some nudity to keep people watching.
It definitely drew a lot of heat.
It did. And while we're on controversies about the visuals, we have to mention The Long Night. Season 8, The Battle of Winterfell.
The episode where everyone turned off their lights and still couldn't see anything? I remember Twitter just melting down that night because people genuinely thought their TVs were broken.
Precisely. The cinematography was so heavily criticized for being too dark to see the action. The cinematographers defended it, though. They called it a naturalistic, artistic choice.
Arguing that a battle at night would be dark and confusing.
Which is true, technically. Real battles are confusing, but also, it's a TV show. We kind of need to see the dragons fighting the zombies.
Yeah, if I can't see it, it didn't happen.
It highlights that tension again, right? Between realism and spectacle. Sometimes realism makes for bad TV. And speaking of tension, let's move to the biggest source of it in the show's history, the thing that ultimately defined its legacy. The books versus the show.
The race against time.
George R. R. Martin started writing A Song of Ice and Fire in the 90s. The show started in 2011. Everyone knew there was a risk the show would catch up. Martin is a notoriously deliberate writer.
Deliberate is a very polite way of saying slow.
And the show was moving fast. By season 6, it had largely overtaken the published novels.
That must have been terrifying for the showrunners. They signed up to adapt a masterpiece, not to write the ending of one.
It fundamentally changed the nature of the whole adaptation. Seasons 1 and 2 adapted one book each. But later, Benioff and Weiss said they were adapting the series as a whole, moving events across timelines. But once they passed the books, the safety net was just gone.
But without the books, what were they even writing? Did they just guess?
Well, they had an outline. Martin gave them an outline for the final 2 unwritten books, The Winds of Winter and A Dream of Spring.
Okay, that line.
But think about the difference between an outline and a novel. An outline says Daenerys burns the city. A novel spends 500 pages explaining the psychological breakdown that leads her to actually light the match.
So they have the what, but they didn't have the why.
Exactly. They had to fill in all the gaps with original content, and that is where the criticism really, really ramped up, particularly in that final season, season 8.
The backlash to season 8 was...
Yeah.
It was loud. It wasn't just I didn't like it. It was pure anger.
That is putting it mildly. The final season had only 6 episodes, and critics and fans alike just felt it was rushed business, plot developments that just defied logic.
I remember the petition.
Yeah, a Change.org petition demanding the final season be remade with different writers. It got nearly 2 million signatures.
That is insane. Did HBO ever seriously consider that?
The source says HBO's president of programming basically said no, they did not seriously consider it. You can't just reshoot a $100 million season because the internet is mad.
Sure.
But the fact that it existed and got so much traction just shows the depth of the fan disappointment.
What was the core of the complaint, though? Was it just that people didn't like the ending? Or was it how we got there?
Was the how. Critics pointed out that the writing became reductive, and this is the crux of it. In the early seasons, if a character needed to get from Winterfell to King's Landing, it took like half a season. We saw the mud on their boots. We felt the time pass. In season 8, characters were basically teleporting across the continent because the plot required them to be somewhere else.
It felt like they were just checking boxes on a list rather than telling a story.
Yeah.
Like, okay, we need a battle here, so let's move the army here.
Precisely. It's the difference between the character does this because it's who they are, and the character does this because the writers need an explosion in the next scene. That shift from internal motivation to external plot requirements is what broke the audience's trust.
It went from a character-driven political drama, which was Martin's strength, to a spectacle-driven blockbuster, which is Hollywood's strength.
A perfect summary.
But despite the ending, despite the darkness, despite all the controversies, you have to admit the legacy of this show is just undeniable. You can't talk about TV history without a massive chapter on Thrones.
You cannot argue with the numbers. It was an awards juggernaut.
Give me the stats.
59 Primetime Emmy Awards. That is the most by any drama series in history.
59. That is a lot of hardware.
And in a single year, and get this, for season 8, the controversial one, it received 32 nominations.
Wow.
That broke a 25-year record held by NYPD Blue.
So even when people were complaining, the industry was still applauding. That's a fascinating disconnect.
And the real-world influence was just as massive. Let's go back to those founding locations. Tourism became a massive industry for these places.
The Game of Thrones effect.
In Northern Ireland, arts and entertainment jobs grew by over 12% between 2008 and 2013. The show was a huge driver of that. It basically built the film industry in Belfast.
And what about Dubrovnik?
Dubrovnik actually had the opposite problem. Hotel bookings increased by 120%. It led to serious concerns about over-tourism.
Oh, wow.
The mayor actually had to impose limits on visitor numbers because the city was being completely overwhelmed by fans wanting to see King's Landing.
That is the power of media. You create a fictional city, and you nearly crush a real one. It's a little bit of a Black Mirror moment.
It is, and it permeated culture in other ways, too. Names. Arya became one of the fastest rising girls' names in the U.S.
I know at least 2 Aryas. And a Khaleesi, actually.
Which is a little awkward, considering how that character turned out.
Yeah, that didn't age well.
And politics. The show was referenced by Barack Obama, Julia Gillard, the former Prime Minister of Australia, and Dutch politicians to explain real-world political maneuvering.
When world leaders are using your fantasy dragon show to explain policy, you've definitely made it. It became a shared language.
It proved that adult fantasy could be a mass-market genre. Before Game of Thrones, fantasy was often seen as niche or, strictly for kids or just Lord of the Rings.
Right. It was for nerds in basements.
Game of Thrones made it cool. It paved the way for these huge budget series like Amazon's Lord of the Rings show or The Wheel of Time. It completely changed the definition of prestige TV.
It showed streamers that you could spend $200 million on a TV show and actually get a return on that investment.
And the franchise isn't dead.
Not at all.
Despite the divisive ending, the brand survived. House of the Dragon premiered in 2022, and another prequel, A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, is scheduled for 2025.
It seems we are never leaving Westeros.
As long as there are stories to tell and budgets to burn, I think you're right.
So as we wrap this up, what's the big takeaway? If we look at this whole crazy journey from that 5-hour lunch to the Emmy record.
For me, it's about ambition. Game of Thrones succeeded because it did what TV wasn't supposed to do. It killed its heroes, it spent movie-level money, it trusted the audience to follow these complex, messy politics, it demanded your attention.
It subverted the trope.
It did. But here is the provocative thought I'll leave you with. The show became a phenomenon by subverting tropes, by ignoring plot armor and avoiding cliches. But in the end, did it fall victim to the very tropes it sought to destroy?
By becoming too big.
Or by becoming too big, too expensive, and maybe too reliant on traditional Hollywood spectacle over the messy, uncomfortable realism that made it so special in the first place? Did it stop being Game of Thrones and start being just another blockbuster?
That is a question worth pondering, and honestly, it makes me want to rewatch the beginning just to see the difference.
It's a fascinating study in evolution.
I'd encourage everyone listening to go back and rewatch Season 1. Watch it not just for the story, but look for that medieval realism. Look at the dirt on the costumes. Listen for the references to the budget, and see if you can spot the exact moment it starts to change.
Indeed.
Thanks for diving deep with us today. We'll see you next time.
Valor Morgulis.
Valor Dahiris.